Well, thank you very much for that wonderful introduction, and how lovely to see so many old friends here as well as new faces, so thank you for inviting me. I'm just going to speak for about 20 minutes, and I apologise in advance for my lack of Dutch. It will be purely English. I'll speak for about 20 minutes, a little bit about my personal experience to set the scene, but also what the situation is now and what we can do about it as concerned individuals. As was mentioned, I started my working life as an intelligence officer for the UK Security Service, which is commonly known as MI5. They used to call themselves UKSS until someone tweaked that it might not have such good connotations nowadays. I worked there for 6 years in the 1990s and saw so many things going wrong there that I, along with my ex-partner, decided to leave and to blow the whistle. And the reason we took this rather drastic step is because we saw incrementally things going wrong, starting off with things like files held on our government ministers, which of course is a bit of a problem for a democracy where you have those very ministers trying to hold the spies to account. So it's a bit of a tail wagging the dog situation. Through to illegal phone taps on journalists, to bombs that could and should have been prevented on UK streets, which MI5 failed to prevent, and innocent people died in the UK. Through to innocent Palestinian students working in London being convicted wrongfully and put in prison for a bomb attack which they did not commit, and finally culminating in a failed assassination attempt against Colonel Gaddafi of Libya back in 1995. Now, we couldn't imagine anything more heinous than this. Under UK law, the operation was illegal, but in this case, MI6, which is a sort of James Bond foreign intelligence gathering section, had paid about $100,000 to a group of Islamic extremist terrorists in Libya to try and assassinate the head of that state. Now, manifestly, this went wrong because Gaddafi is now the new best friend of our Western leaders and is now churning out nice lucrative oil contracts to our countries. But innocent people did die, both in the explosion under the wrong car in the cavalcade and in the ensuing security shootout. So we decided to leave. I mean, we did not sign up to work as counter-terrorism officers, to find ourselves working for agencies that were funding terrorist attacks abroad. Now, under the UK, if you work as a spy, it is illegal to talk about your work. You face prosecution under the Official Secrets Act. So even by blowing the whistle, by exposing crime on the part of the spies, we were the ones who faced going to prison. So we literally resigned and went on the run around Europe. We went to the newspapers with these stories, which were published, and we had to go and flee. First to the Netherlands, strangely enough. We holed up here for a week, and then fled right across down to the southwest of France. And we faced arrest. Our friends, our family, our supporters and journalists were also arrested around us, and some of them were convicted because we had exposed murder on the part of the spies. We had to live in exile for 3 years, and my ex-partner went to prison not once but twice for blowing the whistle. So this was quite a big story at the time, and it was very strange going from the inside, where we've been spying on people, to being on the outside, on the run. And as was mentioned in the introduction, it gave me quite a strong flavour of what it would be like to live under a police state. I mean, obviously, this was an extreme case, but here we were living in a position where we assumed our phones were always tapped. We knew they were tapped. Where our email communications would be picked up. Where we couldn't feel we could have a private conversation in the privacy of our own home because there would probably be a bug in the flat. Where our friends were turned against us by the spies. They were recruited to report back to the spies about what we were getting up to. And where we were living in fear of that knock on the door, where we could just be hauled away and imprisoned. And in fact, that did happen. So these are all elements of what it would be like to live in a police state. And this is something that I wouldn't recommend to anybody. But I think the point of tonight's talk, the point I want to get across is that I believe now that our societies are moving, sliding incrementally into a police state. So I just want to pull back a little bit and say, well, what do we actually mean by that? What's our understanding? Because we have these sort of images of what it would be like to live perhaps under the Soviet Union, the communist regime, or the Stasi in East Germany. Well, what are the elements? What makes a police state? And I would suggest that actually the police state is just the tactics of the state getting heavy against its citizens. What we're talking about is the mindset, the totalitarianism that all governments, if they can get away with it, love to have. This means total 360-degree control of society, not just what we do and what we do outwardly, but also the information we receive, what we think, what our opinions are. And looking at some of the areas, the main areas that need to be controlled in order to get to this totalitarian situation, I would suggest that we are getting very, very close in many Western democracies. So, for example, if you look at the political arena, we have powerless governments of MPs who aren't given the full information they need to make properly accountable decisions, such as taking us into wars in the Middle East. They didn't know the intelligence, they just rubber-stamped through the decision to take our countries into illegal wars. And yet, on the other hand, they seem to be above the law to a certain extent as well. Certainly in the UK, we've had scandal after scandal in the last decade. Particularly resonating with British people is the fact that MPs were fiddling their expenses. They were defrauding the public purse. They were actually committing crimes by doing that. But they assumed they were above the law and they could get away with it, and they have. And of course, in this country, you have your ex-Prime Minister, Balkenende, who took your country into an illegal war. It has been established that it's an illegal war by a judicial inquiry here, and yet he's not held to account either. So the MPs are pretty much above the law and can get away with whatever they want to do. So the political situation is pretty much getting towards the totalitarian ideal. It's very centrist as well. I mean, the meaningful choice between different parties or different styles of government or different ideologies is an idea from the past. We don't have that anymore. Everyone has become very centrist. So even though it's not officially a one-party state, de facto it is. What other areas do they need to look at? Well, of course, the economic, where mega corporations, international conglomerates, can pretty much corrupt, bribe, ride roughshod over our governmental decisions. I mean, I'm sure all of you are very well aware of the Microsoft situation, a multiply convicted monopolist who just continues to operate above the law across Europe. And then there's the judiciary. What happens in our courts? Are they standing up for our basic rights? Are they standing up for our freedoms? Well, not really, I think is the answer. And certainly in the UK, we're already in the midst of a Kafkaesque nightmare where terrorist suspects can be snatched away, interned without trial or even being charged with anything, where they can be kidnapped and extraordinarily rendered to black prisons abroad and tortured for years, and nobody knows where they are. In fact, more information is coming out in the UK about these sort of operations because some of the detainees have made it back to the UK and they are now suing MI5 and MI6 for complicity in their torture. And this is going through the courts, this is a good step. And some of the details are just horrendous. One very famous case is that of a young man called Binyam Mohammed, who not only went through all the usual non-torture things like waterboarding and beating up and everything, but he was actually held in a jail in Morocco and had his penis slashed multiple times with a razor over a period of months. That is what our spies from so-called democracies are getting involved in. And where are the other laws? I mean, we have another one in the UK, which is the Extradition Act from 2003. And under this, it means that if the US demands any of the UK citizens for trial for a breach of US law, they will be handed over without any evidence having to be presented in the court of law. A very famous case is still waiting to be finalised, of that of Gary McKinnon, who is supposedly wanted for hacking into the Pentagon and NASA in the US back in 2002, and he's still fighting that extradition. So the judiciary does not have a very good track record at the moment of upholding our freedoms. In fact, of course, in the UK we don't have a written constitution, we don't have enshrined freedoms, but we did have traditional rights that had evolved over the centuries and been hard fought for. The other aspect as well, that if you want a totalitarian government, a totalitarian regime, you need to control the information your citizens are ingesting, what they get from the media. Now, how many in this room still trust what they read in the mainstream media? Go on. Oh, wow, we have one.
He's a journalist.
Well, again, many problems around this area. The sort of conglomeration of media outlets, the control and the spin that comes from governments and from spies. In the UK, the spy organisations, particularly MI6, have dedicated sections within the agencies to control what goes in the media about them. They spin stories to put a positive slant on them. They plant fake stories to gain nefarious ends. And they have great sway amongst journalists because they can actually threaten those journalists getting briefings, stories to actually maintain their livelihood. So the media can be very easily controlled, not just by these spooks, but also by governments using the same tactics. Plus, of course, there are fewer and fewer outlets, fewer and fewer jobs in the old mainstream media, for all those journalists chasing the information, chasing that work. So they are very much hidebound to do what their bosses tell them. So, of course, we need to use the new media as much as we can to get a fuller idea of what's going on. And finally, for the wonderful totalitarian utopia that we're heading towards in the UK, you need to be able to control the people themselves. All the measures, not just the scary measures like extraordinary rendition of torture, but the day-to-day measures of things like CCTV, closed-circuit television. In the UK, we have 4.5 million, at the last estimate, publicly owned CCTV. And that's not, counting all the privately owned ones on the public buildings as well. They estimate that if you go about your daily business in London now, in the course of one day, you will be photographed up to 500 times. They even have CCTV cameras where police are watching them, and then they can talk at you through the CCTV. So there have been trials up in the north where you drop a piece of litter, and the camera will say, "Can the lady in the blue coat please pick up that litter and put it in the bin?" It's creepy. And also they are taking early orders for military-style drones. Some of the police forces in the UK have bought these things. They're going to start using them next year, where they use military-style drones, at the moment only armed with cameras, to monitor the citizens going about their daily lives on the streets. What else do we have? Well, we have something called the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, which is supposed to monitor and hold to account intercepted communications in the UK. Now, in the good old days, only the spies and customs and the military and certain bits of the police could intercept our communications with the right warrantry. Now, under RIPA, as it's called, we have a situation where 800 public bodies can do that. And we are talking all the way down to your local borough council. So they can spy on the citizens to make sure, they live in the house they say they live in so their kids can go to the right school. To make sure that they're not fishing too much off beaches. I kid you not. So all these measures are coming in. And it's just getting more and more oppressive. There's another brilliant piece of legislation, which was the Terrorism Act 2000, Section 44, which is notorious. And this basically says that the police can stop and question anyone on the street with no justification, no suspicion of any crime having been committed. And if you refuse to cooperate and you refuse to give your identity over, they will arrest you, purely to ascertain your identity. Hundreds of thousands of people have been picked up this way over the last few years on UK streets. So I would say, all these measures are incrementally pushing us towards this sort of totalitarian mindset. And the question is, what can we do about this as concerned citizens? I mean, of course, everyone in this room is going to be very alive to issues around freedom and privacy and civil liberties. But what can we meaningfully do? It's a difficult one. We can all stand up and say enough is enough. But I think as a sort of more switched on, geek, techno crowd, the other thing you can do as well, which would be mutually beneficial, is to reach out to other activist groups. There are many, many, many groups out there, all concerned about these interrelated issues. But many of them are clueless when it comes to tech. I know, I'm one of them, or used to be. And so you find these wonderfully creative, dedicated, active, concerned people out there doing stuff, trying to make a difference, and organising all of this on a Facebook group. It's not about gathering evidence for a criminal activity, it's about giving away intelligence about your strategy, about your mindset. And this is what all these groups are doing. They communicate using Hotmail, they communicate using Gmail. It's easy for the spies to monitor their citizens, very, very easy indeed. So if there was a bit more outreach from the geek community that could offer help and say, well, look, this is just basic ways to protect yourself. A bit like in Russia, the big story where they're using piracy laws and Microsoft is colluding with the spooks to go and disrupt the computers of activist groups over there. It's just giving them basic help about how to protect themselves. And also I think it would help you as well, because then you get more and more people using basic measures like encryption and things, and you get lost in the herd as well. So it's good for your security as well as for everybody else's. So that would be one thing. Of course, the other major advance recently has been the establishment of sites like WikiLeaks, which is an invaluable resource. I wish it had been there in 1997. In fact, I'm going to name drop shamelessly now, but I was in New York at a conference last weekend on a panel discussing privacy issues with Ray McGovern, Colleen Rowley, and Catherine Albrecht, the RFID woman. And they were all saying, look, there must be something more we can do to support activist groups like WikiLeaks, give them more support, fight for the right of Bradley Manning and other people who might get scooped up. So again, another area I think we should really put a lot of attention to. So really it's just a case of, I would suggest, reaching out to other activist groups, supporting the groups that are making a difference, that are forcing governments to hold themselves to account, to be more transparent, whether they want to or not. But it's also taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture always for all of our groups, because it is all interlinked. And I just want to finish by a thought of what it would be really like to have gone all the way into totalitarianism. I live in Germany now. In fact, I moved there last year to escape the police state in the UK. I went to Germany to escape the encroaching fascism. The irony is bitter. But over the summer, we went down to Cologne, and in Cologne there were 2 buildings left standing after the Second World War bombings. It's not just the famous cathedral, it's also the Gestapo HQ, the only other building left entirely. And that has been turned into a museum, a sort of ghastly warning from history. We went in there, and they've kept the cells, and you can visit the cells, and all across the walls there are all these scratched writings in every European language, people who have been disappeared by the Gestapo have just been rounded up and thrown away. And it's like some sort of message they want to show that they existed to the future. And they write of basic things like, they loved, they missed their families, they're innocent and they're about to die. And you read this and you feel really choked and think, God, what would it be really like to have to live in fear of disappearing like that? And that, I think, is where we are going. If we can't draw a line in the sand and say enough is enough, link up with all these different groups, and always keep your eye on the bigger picture. Of course, after the Second World War, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was drafted to prevent such atrocities happening again. Now, if you haven't read that document, please do. This is the first principles. This is where we have to go back to every time we look at our activism, at our politics, about what we stand for and what we can do to effect a change. We stick to those first principles across the board in all these different areas, not just digital civil liberties, not just peace organisations, not just each little area, but really bear in mind the bigger picture of what we could face if we don't take a stand now. So please go out and read that and carry on the fight. Thank you very much.
If someone has a question for you, maybe the case as well. Yes, no. Go ahead.
We talked about the Extradition Act in the UK. Well, we have something similar in the Netherlands too, about specific to the International Criminal Court. It's called the Hague Invasion Act. When a US service member is being tried or detained by the International Criminal Court in The Hague, the US, according to the Hague Invasion, officially it's called different, but it's colloquially called the Hague Invasion Act. According to that law, they have the full right to military invade The Hague to free their US citizen from, yeah, it's ridiculous, I know, but just the idea that they would, be prepared to not only not recognize the International Criminal Court as they do already, but also draft a law to make sure that any U.S. service member or citizen is being freed by the U.S. military. It's ridiculous.
Any other questions?
You suggested that bits of freedom and the people working with it or for it are on scrutiny by Dutch spies or European spies, American spies. Going from the other side, how likely is this?
I think they'll be running to catch up in terms of what the digital community is doing. They're pretty behind the curve, spy agencies, so that's one good thing in our favour. But yes, I think the more embarrassment you cause, the more they will come after you. It's got nothing to do with protecting national security, although they always say it is. So, for example, we know that the Americans drafted a paper on how to deal with the threat from WikiLeaks. What you can do and different tactics you can use to erode trust in that organisation. So I think any organisation that takes a stand and makes waves will hit the radar eventually. I'm not a specialist in the hierarchy of intelligence in this country, but certainly in the UK, we have multiple different agencies investigating. So, for example, if there's an activist group there that begins to get a bit of traction, first of all, it's the secret police that start to investigate. They keep a watching brief. And they might just turn up at meetings, see who's there, try and stop good stories in the media about the group's work and that sort of thing. And then as the group gets more traction, more sort of success, then they'll go up the food chain from the police to the spies, and then to a full-blown intrusive investigation where they start bugging you and following you around and recruiting human agents to get into your group and things. Now, of course, I would suggest that a group like WikiLeaks is definitely there at that level already. How close BoF is, I don't know, but it's a sign of success. Well, I'm out already, so...
Well, I want to thank you very much for this very enlightening and provocative speech also.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Our intern Yildau chose a present for you, which I'm afraid is a bit too perfect, in the sense that you probably already have it. But if you do, then please let me know.
Thank you very much.
We'll change it. Thank you. So to close things off, at least the presentation part. First of all, let me say some organizatorial points. Make some organizatorial points. You can buy some T-shirts. There's also the possibility to make a voluntary donation to the things we do. I'm not sure how it works right now, if you can leave something at the door, but come to me and you can make a donation as well. As you may know, so to end on this very cheerful note, we this is the anniversary of Bits of Freedom, and we brought some birthday cake for this special occasion. I'm not sure where it is, but it's over there. So we'll cut the cake right now and take a piece if you're in there quickly enough. Thank you very much.
Ja,